Hey everyone, welcome to the next session at Discover. Really excited to kick this thing off. My name is Nabil. I lead marketing here at Deliver. Um, you know, this whole conference is really meant to give you a view of some incredible founders, some incredible entrepreneurs, and see just their story and how they've scaled and how they've built businesses. And so I'm really excited to have this session here with Kevin Gould, who is the founder and CEO of Kombo Ventures, just a through and through entrepreneur. So thank you so much for being on the line, and really excited to have this discussion with you.
Yeah, hey Nabil, I'm excited to be here and chat today.
Great. So how about I do like a quick intro to the session, and then we can kick off with some of the questions that I have for you, because they're going to come rapid fire. I know we have a 30-minute session, so it's going to be pretty packed.
Sounds good, man.
Cool. So Kevin, I highly encourage all of you guys to follow him on Instagram, Kevin G, at Kevin G. On his profile, you'll get access to kind of what latest kind of e-commerce trends and learnings. Like I know you post a lot of that. And then there's also a deep dive into the latest happenings at the brands that you're helping to run, that you've co-founded, which are Glamnetic. We have insert name here, and Wakeheart. So really incredible brands that are reaching 100 million in sales in 2021. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been a crazy last couple of years. So I guess I can kind of give you like a brief, very quick, high level background. Founder of Kombo Ventures, which is essentially a holding company, and then I'm the co-founder of 3 different direct-to-consumer. Now they're actually in retail as well. I'm with Ulta and Sephora brands, but Glamnetic, which is in the eyelash and press-on nail space, insert name here, which is women's hair, and then Wakeheart, which is a fragrance and scent brand that I co-founded with the Dolan Twins, who are 2 really incredible influencers.
Awesome. Yeah, no, incredible brands. Like, just it's a pleasure sometimes to just like speak to a founder of one brand that's made it really well. You've done it now on 3 different brands and now have a portfolio behind you. So really excited to kind of get like learnings across that. But before we get started, I think I'd love for you to kind of share a bit of your story with the audience, because I think it's a really fascinating one and kind of like a true like entrepreneurial story. So would love to kind of like hear, how did you get started in e-commerce, and what were the steps that took you to the point that you're at now, where you're running such a large firm?
Yeah, sure. So like a very, very quick high level, grew up in North Carolina, moved to Los Angeles right after college, started in the mailroom at WME, the talent agency. And so at the time it was like kind of pre-influencers, and I was working with a lot of the traditional TV and movie talent. And it was kind of like a grinded out couple years where you just get crushed, and, you start in the mailroom, then you become an assistant, and then you work your way up. But what I got out of it was an amazing working understanding of the entertainment industry, deal making, lots of relationships, and a network, until I ultimately ended up leaving and started my own company. And then kind of through the years, I kind of started managing a lot of pretty large influencers over the years. And a few years ago, I kind of looked at the influencer space and the pull that influencers had, and I thought I had kind of a unique advantage when it came to that. And I wanted to start building, my own brands. And so in 2018, I reached out to Sharon and Jordan, who are now my co-founders on insert name here, which is the hair brand. And they were at the time the first 2 employees at ColourPop, which is a big beauty brand. And we kind of sat down and had a dinner, and a couple of weeks later, we said, "Hey, let's take a shot at this thing and launch it." And so that was the first foray into e-com.
Got it. So you talk about like meeting Sharon and Jordan, and like during that progress, you kind of like, or process, you come up with this idea for a brand. But like taking a step back and thinking about like how that connection happened, can you talk about like just your mentality when it came to kind of making connections, learning, and just being genuinely curious about both tech and the influencer space, and how it eventually led to this meeting that launched like your first brand?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, like early on when I was in the mailroom, it's like just a deep dive in the entertainment space. But kind of through that, I saw how like all these agents were networking and meeting people. And for me, it kind of came down to how can I add value for other people and not ask anything in return? And so I spent just years trying to meet people and add value to them and not ask for anything. And so what happened was it was kind of like this cycle that, I built up a pretty heavy Rolodex of people over the years, and a lot of relationships that I only gave and didn't ask for anything in return. And then kind of through that over the years, it allowed me to get a lot of unique deal flow and access into different companies as I started investing. And so how I met Sharon and Jordan was I was originally an investor in a company called BeautyCon years ago, which was like a Super Bowl meets Coachella for beauty. They at ColourPop was at the event. I met them at the event. We stayed in touch 3 or 4 years later. And that's when I kind of was like keeping up with what they were up to on social. And so it was very serendipitous. I reached out to them and I thought there was something to do there. And we ended up starting a brand.
Makes sense. So it's kind of like just having a genuine like curiosity in people, like trying to understand what are the things that they're doing, and then eventually seeing that there's like a good partnership. And that kind of like brings me to, you know, the topic for this discussion, like the first one really. So like we're talking to someone who's an entrepreneur, launch brands from scratch, like we mentioned. And so I really wanted to deep dive into like 3 kind of like main areas. One is like launching from nothing. Like you basically have nothing on the plate. You just have an idea. You just have a couple people that have a passion. How do you build a brand from there? Then I want to talk a little bit about, you have an idea, how do you get it off the ground? What's the way to like just initially get scale? And then finally, for someone like the bigger brands that might be listening in, once you've achieved scale, how do you stay cool? Like how do you continue to be relevant? So kind of starting on that first point of like launching from nothing, you talked about like finding Sharon and Jordan, and they were like the right partners at the time. How do you think about like partnerships when you're starting off a brand? Why do you look to them, and why do you think that's a good way to kind of get off the ground?
Yeah, well, I think that's a big question in terms of the different stages, and so I'll try to take it by pieces.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think on the first part of starting a brand, I think the first step is make sure you really want to do it and be an entrepreneur, because I think it's, you know, you need to know that you're going to be in for a long road. It's really tough. It's very rewarding and exciting, but being an entrepreneur has lots of ups and downs. And I think if you sort of pass that point and you're ready to dive in, I mean, look, it's easier than ever to start a brand. It's harder than ever to scale it, and so I think you have to like really hone in on a category that you do have a true interest and passion in. That's number one. And then number two, I think you need to figure out where can you play in the space where others aren't. So I think for us, when we looked at the hair space and we started to identify that, we were looking at a lot of different spaces. And initially, Sharon and Jordan's background was in color cosmetics. We just thought the space was too saturated. But when we looked at hair, we thought that there wasn't a lot of innovation happening, that the brands at the time in the hair space were not as great as the cosmetic brands at social, creative, content, community building. And so we saw our way in with, of course, you have to have a high quality product, which we developed, but then we saw a gap where there was a huge audience of people that we thought weren't being serviced in the right way from the legacy brands in the space, because there were a lot of legacy brands. So that was sort of the way we looked at it. And then I think, you know, outside of that, there's lots of other things I think you need to back into. You need to find products that have a fairly high, you know, gross margin or contribution margin. I think like numbers are really important, and they sometimes in the beginning, founders will overlook how important numbers are, but as you scale, they become more important when it comes to unit economics. We kind of developed a whole checklist over the years, you know, ideally, you know, small units. So it doesn't take a lot to, you know, to store in a warehouse. It ships easily. You know, there's a number of different things we look at, but I'd go back to that first part to start, which is like, where's the gap in the market that you think your skill set, you know, can lean in and, you know, and that the lane you can play in.
Yeah, absolutely. So like definitely like thinking about, it's interesting because like when you thought about like where there was a gap, you definitely noticed one, that the legacy brands didn't have the same kind of community that we're building around it. Like where you saw a niche where you could differentiate yourself, obviously in terms of product, like having a high quality product, but what you saw was also the ability to basically take the brand to another level, communicate with people at a different level than what the legacy brands were doing. Can you talk about it a little bit about how do you start that off? Like where does brand building actually kick in? Like from what you're saying, it seems like it's right from the get-go, like you've decided that you needed to build a community around this brand. Where does it come into this play?
Yeah, it's wild when you think about it, because if we go back to like Glamnetic, right, or INH or any of the brands, Wakeheart, and overnight there's no brand, and then the next day you're like, it's launch day, we're launching a brand, the Instagram account launches, and there's 0 followers, right? And you're like, shit, now I got to build a brand, right? And so it's definitely, I think sometimes founders have these expectations that, you know, they're going to launch their brand and you're just going to kill it the first day or first week out the gate. And I think for anyone out there that's like looking to start a brand, it was a grind. I mean, the first couple of days, it was like 1 sale, 3 sales, friends and family. You'd have a negative sale day when there was refunds, and you'd actually lose money on it when you had, one sale, but 2 returns. It was like brutal. Right. But, I think like when we started that Instagram account, it's to build the community. It just takes a lot of like manual work. And so for us, like we started DMing everyone, and we'd look at like hair interest groups or lash interest groups, and we were DMing them. When we had followers follow our account, luckily for both of our brands, and it was my co-founder on Glamnetic, and then Sharon and Jordan on INH, and then the Dolans, they all went very founder facing. And I think this is like an opportunity for anyone, whether you have a following or not. I think brands in the beginning have a content deficit. They don't have enough content. And so I think it's a competitive advantage if the founder, even if they don't have a lot of followers, like Anne was only at 40,000 followers, it wasn't a huge following, becomes the face of the brand and layers in storytelling, because that's a great community building aspect to the brand. And then as we had customers follow us, we literally DM'd every single customer in the beginning. And we turned DM into a sales prospecting channel. And so that's a low hanging fruit for any founder. And then on the influencer front, it's a grind, right? You're reaching out to lots of influencers that could care less about you in the beginning. And you have to convince them that you have an amazing product that they should talk about. And so it's really, it really just takes time. You really got to put in the time. It's super manual. You need to foster the community by actively speaking with them and like having like a two-way conversation. It can't just be like a push, and it can't be just them talking to you and you're not commenting back. And so for us, I think it was a combination of like all those things that over time led to the strong community aspect of it.
That definitely makes sense. I wanted to touch a little bit about the influencer part of like that initial community building and brand building. So you talked about how like initially in their conversations, like you reach out to them, they don't really care, or like it can't be kind of a push conversation. It has to be a push and pull, and there has to be a conversation there. So how do you get like buy-in from influencers when you first start off? Is it that you want to start small? Like it seems like when you launch some of your brands, like with the Dolan Twins, like huge influencers right away, you have like a strong partnership. Maybe if you can talk about both those. One, how do you kind of like influence like get the smaller influencers to kind of help build your brand? And then for the larger ones, how did you get them on board?
Yeah. So maybe we should isolate, because I think the Dolan's one is probably a little unique, and it is a larger influencer. And by the way, that brand every brand has challenges. I'd say that one from the beginning, we were like, look, we need to make this brand bigger than them over the next, 24 months, right? Because when you launch with influencer, the benefit is you get scale right off the jump. The downside sometimes is it's too tied to one person, and you want the brand to live bigger than any one person. But on the INH and Glamnetic side, where there weren't any big influencers attached, we did start small, and we started, with a lot of micro influencers, and it was a lot of just reaching out, and you didn't get a lot, not everyone responded, right? Luckily, I think we did have, and I think this is where it comes back to, everyone has some sort of competitive advantage. I think one of our competitive advantages was between myself, Sharon, Jordan, or even Anne, we all had a pretty good amount of influencer relationships. So I think that was one of our unfair competitive advantages we definitely brought to the table. Someone else may have that in manufacturing. Someone else may have that in fulfillment, right? Ours was that. But it was still, even with that, like it was a grind of just reaching out to a lot of micro influencers. But I think you need to do things that can stand out, right? Like don't send the, a super formatted DM to them. We do things like send video messages or send voice memos via DM, right? Where an influencer's like, whoa, that's weird. I got a voice memo via DM from a brand. Like we kind of put a face to the brand, and, we were able to up our response rate probably a little bit more than others would get. So you kind of got to think really outside the box in terms of the way that you're going to, craft a strategy to actually get influencers to care and talk about you.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think like this ties back to kind of like your story as well, of like just genuinely caring about and like investing and trying to learn more. And that helps you kind of like build your network. I wonder, like you're based in Los Angeles now. I just had a quick question just about kind of like communities and like, how do you kind of like help build your network? Do you recommend, like you mentioned that you were from, Indiana originally, and then you came down to LA. Like, is that something you recommend for new founders? Like, how do they kind of like get right in and start building a community of other people that they genuinely care about?
Sure. Yeah. I'm actually, so I actually moved to Miami in December. So I'm a Florida resident now, but we still have a lot of people on the team in LA. And And yeah, for it's interesting, right? Because I think even though it's probably only a 10 years difference, I came up, I think, a different time where in the moment when it was like kind of like pre-Instagram, it was really important to be in LA. And I don't think I would have fostered the relationships I did if I had not been here right out of college and like got thrown into the entertainment business and met all these people and like, and it was a lot of in-person networking. Now, obviously the benefit is you can be anywhere. I've met so many people just through DM and on Instagram, and I always have like up and coming founders reach out to me. And so the network of access is obviously a lot larger now. And also I think this is like 12 years ago. It was really, I remember like not having a lot of resources to figure out how to be an entrepreneur, and YouTube obviously wasn't as robust as it is now. And so the benefit now is everything's on the internet. You can learn anything. As long as you're constantly curious, you can figure it out. And then again, it goes back to figuring out ways to add value for other people you're trying to get to. So I think, I think if you're reaching out to people that you're trying to get to, you can cultivate a really serious network if you don't ask for things for yourself and just, figure out things you can do for that other person that can add value to what they're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So like in your journey now, I guess like we're tracing through like launching a brand, going into like scaling. We've kind of built a business. We have the foundations. You've started like building the brand through like just hard kind of like brute force, like DMs, messages, getting the word out. Now, where do you think that like a brand, or in your experience, did you hit like an inflection point? And was it because of something that you did in particular? Like, did you marry like ads with your organic channels? Is that when you started hitting an inflection point, or was it just like chipping away and then it just happens organically?
Yeah, it was a mix of everything. I think, again, it's easier than ever to launch a brand and it's harder than ever to scale it. So I think to take it to the next level, you really need the flywheel, the entire flywheel of marketing and e-commerce going. So I think we break it into buckets where it's, content, creative, social, community, paid acquisition, influencer, retention, right? And that's kind of like the flywheel of all the things you need running. You need to be, out of that flywheel, you probably need to have 2 or 3 that you're like best in class at. And then the others, you need to be at least a good generalist at and pretty good at them to make it work and take it to the next level. And I think to take it to the next step, you literally have to be good at all of them. And you'll run into roadblocks if you aren't. Obviously, everyone in the space right now, I'm sure on this chat, is like, shit, acquisition costs are super high. The iOS thing messed everyone up. So it's definitely been a grind this year, I think, for everyone in the space. And if someone says it isn't, they're lying, because it's I think every brand and every co-founder, every founder I talk to, they're all sort of trying to figure out like, how do we continue to diversify out from acquisition? And for an early stage brand, the reality is a lot of your marketing budget is going to acquisition, but that's why it's more important than ever to build these other channels up so that you have this other base that you can rely on outside of acquisition. And there's not one thing that gets you the scale of Facebook, right? Like we're on Glamnetic, we're doing TV now. I'd say, look, TV, you can get to scale if it works. And that is like big scale. But other than that, like influencers, gifting, retention, co-op commerce, there's all these different things we use. And those are like 20 of those things that in aggregate, if you do them pretty well, they equal the scale of a Facebook. But you just have to invest the time and manual, the manual time into building those things out. And there's no easy way around it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like the take home, the drill home is like, there's no easy way about these things. Like you really have to work on all things. And
yeah, I think everyone always, and I would too, right? Everyone wants like the easy, like what's the next Facebook? And the reality is there's not, right? You've got to do 20 different things really well in order to get that scale to take it to the next level.
Absolutely. And in that, like, I think another theme here is just like being creative and thinking outside of the box and approaching with different angles. So like, how do you kind of think of, like, obviously there's an innate like talent and your team has like a talent around like thinking creatively and out of the box, but what are some ways that you can kind of like scale creativity?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think you just have to be super constantly curious about things, and some things you try work and some don't. I mean, I think for us, I'm a massive believer in live commerce. And so we've been investing a lot of our time into live commerce. And while it makes up a small percentage of revenue now, we're taking a bet on the future that we're going to have an infrastructure built that probably others might not have because we're investing in it now. Or, we think back to like when Clubhouse was popping, we're on Clubhouse right away. And, we're like acquiring a different audience there. And like Anne, my co-founder on Glamnetic, was doing a ton of speaking on Clubhouse, and it was a lot more business oriented, but it was also building the brand in a different way. Or we started accepting crypto on Glamnetic, right? And it makes up a small percentage of orders now, but it was something that is worth testing. And it was like an outside the box way of thinking. We do outdoor advertising now. You have to pick and choose what you do there because it's really hard to justify the ROI. But both I&H and Glam have a Times Square billboard up right now. And we, remnant inventory became available, and it made sense. And it was a cool social moment, and it was a great community building play. And it's not necessarily like a direct ROI driver. So you just got to like continue to try things. And if you think of super outside the box things, some of them are going to work and some of them aren't, right? So you can't get disappointed if they don't work. And I think you need to encourage your teams as a leader, really important as a leader if you're running a company, to just encourage people to make mistakes. Obviously minimize the big mistakes. You don't want too many of those, but they're not going to be innovative if you don't encourage risk taking and trying things.
Absolutely. Like, you have to keep iterating, keep testing. New channels always open up. You got to replace the ones that are starting to get saturated. iOS 14 comes out. You got to figure out what other channels that you want to push on the live commerce thing. I find that really interesting because, one, not a lot of brands do it well. Two, it's still kind of like a new channel, I would say. Like, obviously, like a new channel that you're launching into. When you're going into that, how do you make it so it's not just like a long infomercial? Like, what are some of the things that your brands are doing to make this like an engaging, creative platform?
Yeah, I feel like I can talk about live commerce all day.
Yeah.
Look, I think long form lives are an amazing way to do deeper education as a brand, right? So, the hard thing with like, Instagram and stories and all these other platforms is the attention span is sometimes hard to convey a deeper message and like product education and just education about the brand and do's and don'ts. And so we really use lives. It's a more, it's a smaller audience, right? That's generally tuning into the length of these lives, but the deeper connection that they have in them allows you to do different things. So we, and when I look at the live space, we do, 75 lives a month on Facebook and IG Live with different influencers. Wow. And then we haven't said this anywhere yet. So I'm actually launching this coming month a SaaS business in the live commerce space. It's basically going to be a plug and play live commerce shopping experience on site. So it's called Livecom, LYVECOM.com. And basically, like, the way I think about the space is you have to have, your lives that are on social, on the Facebooks, the YouTubes, the TikTok lives. The platforms are going to get better about the way that they integrate, shopping into the experience, because they're just not anywhere near where Asia and China is yet. But I think the other way, the issue there is you still don't own the audience and the data. So the other thing we're doing with this SaaS business I'm starting, it's basically like a plug and play Shopify. You can live stream on site, add to cart, buy. And so that's I think for me, we've just been kind of testing it here and there on our own sites, and we're going to roll it out broader soon. So it's my first foray into the SaaS side of things, and excited about that.
First of all, love it. Very cool idea. Secondly, love, first time we get to talk about this at Discover Conference. So let me just like dive a little bit deeper here. Is this going to be like a plugin for your Shopify store? Is it like a white label solution that you can just add to your website, and then it'll have a live shopping experience on your website?
Exactly. By the way, you and I didn't talk about this at all before.
We didn't at all.
I was actually trying to figure out if I was going to bring it up or not. So yeah, it's a plug and play Shopify solution where it just plugs into your store. It allows either, a brand owner, and then, it could be a team member, it could be an influencer to go on, log into a dashboard, and stream live on the website. And then there's all of the e-commerce integrated into the, into the actual dash. It runs through, it runs through Shopify payments or whatever your payment processor is. We're just like the plug-in solution for the actual live streaming.
Got it. Yeah, very cool. We didn't discuss this at all, but thought I'd like dive a little bit into it because it seems like a really cool idea. So thanks for sharing that. Maybe like kind of touching on like the next side of things. So like we talked a little bit about like getting scale. We've obviously talked about like brand building from the start. You talk a lot about like this wall that brands hit. Like you're now across 3 of your brands are pacing to 100 million in sales, which is a phenomenal achievement. So now that you're kind of like hitting that level of scale, what's next? Like I feel you've talked about like hitting a wall. How do you get past that? Why does that happen in the first place even?
Yeah. I think there's different macro, I think this year, right? And again, everyone's facing this where there's macro environmental issues with iOS and Facebook and ad costs that are creating a lot of headwinds in the space. But you do reach a point as a brand where you're 20, 30, 50, 60 million in revenue, right? Where the beauty of that is you've built up a lot of awareness, right? You've probably spent a lot on marketing. And so for us, the next natural extension, which has been going great so far, has been the retail side of things. So I think brands truly need to sort of live in the 3 different channels of e-com and D2C, retail, and then Amazon. I think they can all live together and have their own lane. And so for us, Glamnetic launched into Ulta. We got out really quick, actually. We launched into Ulta in January of this year, and that's been super successful. And then since then, we've rolled on Sephora.com and Nordstrom.com and have a bigger retail push next year. And then I&H, we launched in 1,000 Ulta doors this last month, and it's also been going great. And so I think you have to have the retail component, and then there's an uplift factor that happens in retail when you drive a lot of marketing awareness via D2C. And then I think the other thing, and you have to make sure you're ready for it, you have the infrastructure and the ops in place, is the international side of things. And there's a lot that goes into that, because obviously you want to make sure you're fulfilling in the region. It's really, I think most brands obviously see international sales, but it's a small percent if they're fulfilling out of the US. And so I just because of the shipping cost and the time. And so I think there's a massive opportunity to sort of apply what we've done in the US and then take that template and move it internationally. But you just need to make sure you plan it out the right way and don't do it too quickly, because it does take a lot of thoughtfulness put against the idea and the plan.
Right. Like you very much need to have the processes in place and that scale to be able to do that.
Even, by the way, even before you go into retail, like, you can't be late on shipments to Target or Ulta, Sephora, Walmart. You need to make sure you have like all of your ops in place and tight before you go into retail.
Absolutely. You touched a little bit about kind of like this synergy. I know we're like reaching time, so this will be like one of the final questions I asked for you, but like, I find this is interesting because you talked about like the synergies of like when you push marketing online and then you have like in-store channels as well. And then you also have like your D2C channel. There's obviously like this network effect that takes place. My question to you then is like a little bit touching on like live shopping too. You have an experience on live shopping that's like on a virtual property. Do you have any plans on like doing experiences now in store now that you have your brands launching in store?
For sure. I think so. I think we're thinking a lot about, I love experiential marketing. Like, I think it's an amazing way to like get a deeper relationship with your customers in person. We're thinking through now what that looks like for next year. Like, we did a cool little pop-up shop. I&H did a pop-up shop where we partnered with other brands. I think one thing, I'm kind of deviating a bit from the question, but one thing that's super important for every brand now is brands need to stick together, meaning that like there's a lot of audience overlap between synergistic brands. And I think that it's more important than ever that brands figure out ways to work closer together. So our version of that was doing, we teamed up with Mayfair Group and this jewelry brand called Girls Crew and a few other brands. We did like a pop-up experiential shop in LA for I&H, and that worked really, really well, right? And we pulled all of the combined audiences to the pop-up shop. The downside to experiential is you have to be in person. It takes a lot of time. And so you just kind of have to think through what are the moments that make sense for your brand, and do you have the capacity, and does your team have the capacity to do it?
Absolutely. I know we're reaching time. I think I'd be remiss to not ask this one final question to you, which is, there's a lot of like early founders on this call who are just starting off their e-commerce journey. Your final like bit of advice for them?
Yeah, I just say don't get discouraged. Like, I think it's a really hard thing you're doing, and there are a lot of ups and downs. And I think you need to make sure that you are mentally prepared and are really thinking positive about the experience. I'd say the other thing too is just like really know your numbers. Even if a lot of founders, a lot of times, are very marketing driven or creative, and you really need to, even if you're not the finance person, you need to be a generalist when it comes to numbers, because otherwise it's going to come and bite you in the ass, and numbers can flip on you real quickly when things start to scale. And so, I'd say that's like a really important piece to running the company as well. And then also just treat your, as you scale, like make sure you treat your team members the right way, and try to cultivate like a strong culture.
Yep, that definitely makes sense. I know we're at time now. Thank you so much. Really appreciate Kevin. I think there's like a ton of insight across so many different areas in e-commerce. Pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Nabil.
Take care.
Yeah.